All right. Welcome to another episode of Visions of Tomorrow, a series of videos where I review science fiction movies of the past. Today I'm talking about yet another post-apocalyptic film. This time it's the 1985 movie from New Zealand, The Quiet Earth, directed by Geoff Murphy and starring Bruno Lawrence, Alison Rutledge, and Peter Smith. As always, this video will contain spoilers, so if you haven't seen the film, make sure you watch it before you finish this video. I don't know why you would click on this video if you haven't seen the film, but anyway, go watch it and then come back and watch this one. All right, let's dive in. Like any good post-apocalypse worthy of its name, we begin with full frontal nudity, as is tradition. Zach Hobson, who's played by Bruno Lawrence, wakes up feeling very strange and notices that his clock has stopped at 6:12. Zach explores the city and finds it completely empty. There's nothing around. He finds abandoned houses full of breakfasts that have already been served, yet no people. Cars with seatbelts buckled in, still no people. A plane crashed in the middle of a city, no passengers, dead or alive. It's as though everyone just vanished instantaneously from existence. Not just people, but all animal life seems to have vanished as well. He soon realizes that he might be the last man on Earth. Zach is a scientist working for the Delenko Corporation, which was involved in Project Flashlight, an international effort to create a wireless global energy grid. He quickly ascertains that Project Flashlight must have been responsible for the apocalypse. He describes the phenomenon as the effect. Well, now he has nothing to do but drink, screw around, and hope he doesn't go insane in all his newfound loneliness. He abandons his humble abode for a big mansion and drinks champagne with eggs for breakfast. Isn't that something? In one of the most memorable scenes of the movie, Zach, donning a lavish dress, speaks in front of a bunch of mannequins that he collected from department stores, declaring himself the president of this quiet earth.
I have dedicated all my scientific knowledge and skill to projects which I knew could be put to evil purposes. For the common good, they said.
We spend quite a bit of time with Zach, but eventually we discover that he's indeed not the last man on Earth. There is another one. We soon meet Joanne, played by Alison Rutledge, another survivor of the event. Both Zach and Joanne are overjoyed to see each other. They explore the city together. Maybe they'll find more survivors. If there's two of them, it makes sense that there could be more. Eventually, they end up sleeping together because, hey, what else is there to do in this apocalypse? Zach is also conducting some measurements of the environment with various instruments as something seems off to him, though he can't quite put his finger on it. It's not too long before they meet another survivor, a Maori man named Api, played by Peter Smith. Though initially hostile and guarded, he is very glad to have met the other two survivors. As the three of them discuss their experiences together, they realize that they all survived the event because it happened precisely at the moment when they were about to die or had just died. The exact timing is a little bit ambiguous and not very clear, but something like that. We find out that Api was being drowned just as the event happened. Joanne had electrocuted herself, while Zach had taken sleeping pills in an attempt to commit suicide. A bit later in the film, we discover the reason for Zach's attempted suicide. He knew of the potential dangers of Project Flashlight, but he said nothing, and he feels guilty about this, even though this was a project, an international project, led primarily by the Americans, and New Zealand had only a tiny part to do with it. Still, he felt guilty that contributed even a fraction to the strange apocalypse. At the same time, perhaps inevitably, a love triangle develops between our three characters, which leads to a lot of tension, especially between Api and Zach. Joanne loves them both, but it's not surprising that she ultimately is drawn to Api, who is younger, better looking, and wears that sweet-ass leather jacket the whole time. As we all know, when given a choice, you always pick the guy with a full head of hair. Anyway, in the end, none of it matters. The environment around them is changing as Project Flashlight is still active. The effect will happen again, Zach determines, and this time no one will survive. They do have a small chance to stop it, however, if they destroyed the grid at the location Zach worked at. So they load up a truck full of explosive and drive towards the location with the intention of blowing it up to smithereens. But there's a problem. Of course there is. There's no free lunch in this world. The grid is leaking radiation and they can't approach it directly. Zach proposes he grabs a remote control unit so they can drive the truck from a distance. It's unlikely to work, and Appy is convinced that he'll have to drive the truck himself, sacrificing his life to save everyone. However, Zach is way ahead of him. He steals the truck and drives it straight to the grid, blowing up. In the final scene of the movie, Zach wakes up on a strange beach overlooking an otherworldly vista of a ringed planet rising over the horizon. The end. The Quiet Earth is one of those movies that, as soon as you watch, you immediately get this impression that it's an allegory about something, although you're not sure about what exactly. It's hard to come up with a foolproof, coherent interpretation of The Quiet Earth because you can look at it through so many angles and through so many lenses. Anytime you try to explore an idea, you find that it doesn't quite fit 100% with the flow of the movie. And maybe perhaps that is the problem with allegories. There's never an exact one-to-one mapping with whatever idea you're trying to explore. We can look at the film through the science fictional lens, as a science fictional story. We can look at the love triangle that develops. We can look at the religious angle or a racial class point of view, analyze how each topic is approached, etc. But before we get into any of that, I think I need to grab some more coffee. So we'll be right back. All right. Different cup. Things are getting serious. The Quiet Earth is based on a novel with the same name written by British-born New Zealand author Craig Harrison. They both follow a similar structure with the same premise, more or less, of the last man on Earth. But the film does make some significant changes, mostly for the better, in my opinion. There's no love triangle element in the novel. It's just the Zach character, just like in the film initially, and then he meets Appy, and just like in the film. The Zach is called John in the novel, if I remember correctly. But there's no Joanne, or at least the female character that they meet is more or less dead right away. There is a component of genetic modification in the novel where the protagonist is both a scientist and a participant in the experiment. I'm not quite sure how that works out. He has a family, or he had a family that he accidentally killed, or something like that. The final twist in the novel is sort of the implication that Hobson, the scientist, has been repeating or reliving the same day over and over again, sort of like a purgatory type of deal that is also present, at least symbolically present, in the movie. I did say there will be spoilers, right? So you already got your warning if you are planning to read the novel. But in this video, I will mostly focus on the movie version, and I won't really say anything else about the novel. As I said, a major component of the film is that the film adds over the novel is this sort of like this idea of a love triangle that is introduced with the Joanne character that is not present in the novel. This is kind of directly inspired from the 1959 movie The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, starring Harry Belafonte. And you could even the two films are very similar. In fact, you could even say that The Quiet Earth is more of a remake of The World, the Flesh, and the Devil than it is a movie based on the novel that its name comes from. You could make that argument, I suppose. Although in the older movie, in the 1959 movie, The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, the tension is a lot more clearly about race, and it has an arguably much less satisfying ending than The Quiet Earth. The Quiet Earth is more nuanced and more subtle, in my opinion, when the two men clash over it, for sure, but it never takes precedence over the kind of larger plot element, which is dealing with the effect and the impending apocalypse, or second apocalypse, because it already happened. I don't know if this is due to recognizable movie tropes that the audience sort of is used to and expects to see, or if there is something subtle about the performances of the actors in The Quiet Earth. But the movie doesn't have to say much. It doesn't have to show much for us to recognize the conflict that Appy's arrival in the film introduces and brings to the overall character dynamics between the three characters. When Joanne in The Quiet Earth says something like, as innocuous as "it's the three of us now," you immediately know, as does Zach in the movie, that things are not that simple anymore. It becomes pretty apparent that the introduction of the Appy character has added something extra to the plot, and the film doesn't really have to doesn't beat you over the head with it. It's not so on the nose as to kind of to signal it right away. You sort of get it, and you also understand that or at least it becomes apparent pretty quickly that Joanne ultimately, or maybe right from the beginning, kind of prefers Appy over Zach Hobson in the movie. Whether it is because they're both young and attractive people, Zach is a little bit older. I think they're both in the 20s or maybe 30s, where Zach is in his 40s. Maybe there's something about their personalities being more compatible, or even something about class solidarity, insofar as the film explores the question of class. It's clear as much that while Joanne loves both of them, she prefers the Appy character. Zach realizes this pretty quickly, too, which is perhaps part of his motivation for choosing to sacrifice himself at the end of the movie.
It's easier for me because I like both of you.
But you do prefer him.
Not to take sides or anything, but he takes rejection like a champ. Good for him, I guess. The whole thing is so well done. It's powerful, it's entertaining, it's interesting to watch. It has emotional gravitas, yet it never, like I already mentioned, never beats you over the head with it. It's never overdone as though to seem or to approach melodrama.
You needn't worry about me, eh? Whatever happens, I can handle it.
The film also explores the concept of race, gender, and possibly class as manifested in the interaction between the three characters. Zach is a white man, obviously, presumably descended from the ethnicity that colonized New Zealand, which was initially inhabited by Api's people, the Maori. Even in a metafictional sort of way, Zach is the main character of the film, and he has the most screen time of all the three characters. He is, whether officially or unofficially, often thrust into a position of authority, or a position where he is in charge, even though, ironically, he is the person, or perhaps that's the point, that he is the person at least partially responsible for the destruction of the earth. At one point, when he tries to explain the situation to the Appy, that is the sort of like the upcoming second effect, as they call it, he says something along the lines of, "Oh, it's hard for me to explain things to people like you." I think it's very clear, or at least I think that's the intention of the movie, is where what he means is he as a scientist versus Appy as a non-scientist, or a lay person, and Appy takes this more as a racial comment, and I think that misunderstanding is fairly on the nose there. It's, I think, part of the point. I think the film here is trying to demonstrate the difference in status, whether inherent or imposed, that arises as a result of these racial or even class differences. Although it doesn't linger on them, at least not too much. It's as though it's just something that exists in the background, regardless of everything else that is happening at the same time, which I think is an interesting way to approach the subject. At the same time, however, Zach too is just a pawn in a much larger game played by, in this case, of the Americans, presumably American corporations, although we don't really know. It's never specified. He feels guilty for being part of the research that eventually caused the effect, even though it kind of becomes clear, it is strongly implied in the film, that there was absolutely nothing he could have done to stop it. As he says, New Zealand was a tiny, tiny part of the overall project, which was led by the Americans, and he was even a tinier part of all that. So there's, no matter what he had tried, and in the film it's sort of implied that he didn't try anything, but I think we can at least put two and two together and say that it doesn't matter, like he was just a pawn in the whole game. There was nothing that he could have really done to stop, at least personally, there was nothing that he couldn't have done. Of course, that doesn't assuage his guilt, and it is fairly obvious why he would feel guilty in a scenario like this. He feels guilty not for anything that he could or couldn't have done, but perhaps his guilt is more abstract or more ambiguous. So sort of being part of the system, sort of like the chain of exploitation, whether this has to do with race, class, geopolitics, or all of the above, a chain where he wasn't at the top, but he was still higher than most people, and he was content allowing to happen as long as he saw some benefits from it. In the notable scene where he speaks in front of the mannequins at the beginning of the movie, which, as I said, is one of the most memorable and famous scenes of the movie, he says something like, "How easy to believe in the common good when that belief is rewarded with status and power," which kind of makes this point where it's not about what he could have caused or how much he contributed. It's sort of like this passive guilt, this passive compliance to a system of exploitation, to a system that, to a system of inequality, where just being a member of it is almost, at least through some interpretation, is almost like you're perpetuating through existing in that system. Maybe the film is trying to explore that aspect, or maybe I'm just reading too much into it. I don't really know. There's a moment in the film where all three characters sit down to assess their situation. This is shortly after the introduction of Api. And Api says he thought he was dead because he had died right before the event happened, and that's how they discover what it is that led to their survival. And Api thought he might be dead, he might be a ghost roaming the earth, haunting the earth, etc. Joanne says jokingly that this guy thought he was God, speaking of Zach, of course. In a later scene, she accuses Api of acting like God. Again, I'm not sure if I'm reading too much from it, but I do find it interesting that we see the two men comparing themselves or being compared to a God, or generally speaking, some kind of absolute authority. In the scene before that I mentioned earlier, in the mannequin, Zach claims to be the president of this quiet earth. We don't explicitly see him say he is God, but perhaps he did. Yet Joanne never, this assumption is never made about Joanne. There's no point in the film where Joanne is sort of like compared to to an absolute authority like a god or like a president. She is sort of like always in this more natural place, or I don't know exactly how to describe it, but she doesn't have these sort of delusions of grandeur that the two men sort of like put themselves. Even though it is a strange scenario, it is an apocalypse, still I think there is something interesting there, that kind of the film makes us think about how the two genders, how different genders, how they fit into a larger society, and how that kind of carries over even in this extreme scenario of a post-apocalyptic last man on earth scenario. The movie can also be clearly interpreted as an allegory in religion. In fact, I think this might be the most common interpretation of the movie, that they're in purgatory, or at least Zach is, if we take this to be primarily his story. And the last act of sacrifice sends them, or Zach, to paradise, or whatever version of the afterlife, or whatever positive version of the afterlife one might have. That ending on the beach with sort of like the main soundtrack playing loud over the sort of like that planet rising through the horizon does have something about does have something divine, sort of blissful, something paradise like quality about it, though I'm not really an expert. There's also the sort of like the early scene in the film before the other characters are introduced, where Zach is sort of like angry and kind of goes into the church in a dress, I believe, and starts shooting up the place. It's sort of like a moment, it's meant as a representation of a man's misplaced anger towards the divine, misplaced because it should really directed towards himself, and probably it is directed towards himself, and there's a little bit of projection there. You can also see the three main characters as some kind of version of the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, although I'm not sure which is which in this scenario. You also have the fact that the experiment that Zach was involved with literally is messing with creation, as Zach points out in one of his sort of like monologues where he kind of records himself with a sound recorder, with a tape recorder. He says that some of the fundamental physical constants of the universe, like the mass of the electron or the charge of the electron, I'm not sure which one it is changing, which is causing the predicament that they're in. All this intellectual mambo jambo aside, this is a really entertaining film, and it's also a really good-looking film. The cinematography is, I believe, by James Bartle, who does a fantastic job photographing this particular version of the end of the world. The most stunning shot of the whole movie is, of course, the final shot, the final scene, rather, where we have a sort of like a very well done special effect, which is practical, and it's really fascinating how they did it. But we see sort of like this ring planet on rising over the horizon on this strange beach. And it is the most famous shot of the movie. It is the most beautiful shot of the movie. Ironically, even though it happens at the very end, it is also the image that was used in all promotional materials for this film. And if you Google it, it's one of the first thing that you'll find. Although I guess it's pretty abstract. It doesn't really spoil anything. It doesn't ruin anything plot-wise. So I guess it's fine. Although you'd think they would kind of leave it as a surprise for the audience to kind of discover once they make it to the end of the film. Regardless, there are also some other amazing shots spread throughout the movie that capture sort of the tone of this particular flavor of the apocalypse. Again, there's probably some inspiration from The World, The Flesh, and the Devil, but I think overall The Quiet Earth also stands on its own. Similar things can be said about the soundtrack, which mostly has this one recognizable theme that plays over and over again, but I think it's used to pretty good effect. Considering the entire film is held together by the performances of 3 actors, they all do a fine job at carrying the film. I have to say Bruno Lawrence, who plays Zach, is the clear standout. There's a good 30 to 35 minutes of the film where Zach is alone before anyone else shows up, and those are some of the most interesting scenes of the movie, not in small part because of the performance of Bruno Lawrence. He's just so interesting. He sort of like, there's nothing, looking at it, there's nothing that he does that is particularly extraordinary, but he's still so interesting to watch, so captivating to watch in those early scenes. He also has a screenwriting credit in the movie, in The Quiet Earth, so it's reasonable to assume that he was pretty invested in the success of this film, and I think it shows. All right, so whenever I write these reviews and I think about these films, I always like to come up with companion pieces of whatever movie it is that I'm analyzing, things that kind of go well with it as kind of part of a double feature. And there's no shortage of Last Men on Earth type of movies, to which The Quiet Earth certainly belongs to. Like I already kind of mentioned, The Quiet Earth can be considered a loose remake of The World, The Flesh, and the Devil, the 1959 movie starring Harry Belafonte. And the two share quite a lot of similarities with each other, most of all being sort of like this concept of 3 survivors entangled in a love triangle. In contrast to The Quiet Earth, like I already mentioned, The World, The Flesh, and the Devil is a lot more clearly about race, and pretty much about race alone. The ending of the film is also considered universally disappointing, although personally I have to say I did not hate it as much as everyone else does. I can sort of understand why they went in the direction that they did. Still, I would not consider it a great companion for The Quiet Earth for many reasons, but one is that I think maybe the films are a little bit too similar in tone. I think for a film like The Quiet Earth, a better companion would be something that offers kind of a palate cleanser, something that is similar but also different in tone, if that makes sense. And the film that possesses sort of like these two contradictory qualities is the 1984 film Night of the Comet.
Samantha? What? God, what are you trying to do? Give me a heart attack?
What's happening?
Oh yeah, I guess you are a little confused.
I'll go to pep squad practice and split after. Except I don't know if pep squad practice is on or not. Can't get anybody on the phone.
There's nobody! I mean, there's nobody!
All right, nobody.
Look! Look at this!
The plot of Night of the Comet involves almost everyone on Earth being wiped out by a mysterious comet that flies by the Earth and turns everyone into dust or into zombies, bar for a couple of teenage girls who are trying to survive in this mad new world. Night of the Comet is a movie that is fun, it is campy, it's a bit silly at times, has surprisingly great cinematography, and most of all serve as a great palate cleanser for The Quiet Earth. So that's why I think it would make for a great double feature with The Quiet Earth. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say about The Quiet Earth. I think it's a great film. Obviously I wouldn't have done the video if that wasn't the case. If you somehow watch this video without having watched the film, I don't know why you would do that, but okay, go and watch the movie. It's a really, really great one. All right, I will see you next time.